It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Good morning. It is Sunday, and we are here again, Locked On NFL Sunday. You've got my good friend Cody Roark at Cody Roark NFL, host of the Locked On Broncos podcast, and myself, Ross Jackson at Ross Jackson Nola, host of Locked On Saints and Tuesdays over on Locked On NFL. And we appreciate you very much for being here for another live NFL Sunday show as we continue on throughout the offseason, covering all the big stories throughout the week. Cody, how you doing today, buddy?
I'm good, my man. Look, we got some news about some wide receivers potentially moving. We're going to talk about quarterbacks today and some of the teams that, hey, we got the quarterback position under the microscope. Did they get better? Are they in a good position with, some acquisitions? We'll have to see. But, man, very excited to break it down with you here on this beautiful Sunday where, look, we talk about football, no fluff. That's why fans tune in.
That's right. None of this other stuff. There will be no cameos. There will be no skits. There will be none of that. There will only be football, and there will only be football. We will have some visitors, though. We're going to be joined by our good friends Evan Sidery and James Rapine of the Locked On Colts and Locked On Bengals podcast, because we have a big focus on quarterbacks in today's episode. We are going to open up with some wide receiver news, which, of course, is quarterback relevant, though, because we're going to be talking a little bit about Julio Jones. Reportedly, the team, the Atlanta Falcons, interested in exploring some trade options for Julio Jones. Seems that there's already been some internal conversations when it comes to the New England Patriots. And if you look at the odds in terms of some other places where he might end up, of course, Baltimore, San Francisco, the Los Angeles Chargers, and the Tennessee Titans, all on that list within the top 5, along with the New England Patriots. But the question I keep coming back to here, Cody, is why? Why, as the Atlanta Falcons, are you interested in moving on from Julio Jones?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I have no idea. When I saw them go with Kyle Pitts, I know our good friend Aaron Freeman hosted the Locked On Falcons podcast. He wasn't too happy that he decided not to go quarterback. But right. The thing with me, when I look at Kyle Pitts, Calvin Ridley, Julio Jones, they finally have an opportunity on offense to really do some big things. Now, I think defensively last year, they were talented. Grady Jarrett was a force to be reckoned with on the interior. And so if they can have more consistent offensive production, they had different guys last year battling theirs, whether it be Calvin, whether it be Julio. They have options now. They have 3 legitimate guys for Matt Ryan to throw the football to and for the offense to take the next step, to take advantage of red zone situations where, we saw some missed opportunities last year. So I think for Julio Jones, he's still at a point of his career where he can offer a lot of value to the Falcons. The question is, as the Falcons undergo these major changes, is Julio Jones in their plans? I mean, based on these conversations, it appears that there is a 50-50 chance that it may not be Julio's time in Atlanta. He may go elsewhere. But, I mean, for me on paper, Ross, I don't think it makes too much sense, especially if you are the Falcons, if you're looking to compete in the next 2 to 3 year window that you still have with Matt Ryan, who I believe has 3 to 5 years left of really good quarterback play in him. I don't know. It just doesn't make too much sense to me.
Yeah, no, I just don't see it. I mean, this feels like one of those moments. It's almost like the reverse of what happens sometimes where you trade a player away, create a hole, and then draft a player to fill it. I mean, this is one of those moments where you've drafted Kyle Pitts. You have the opportunity here, just like you mentioned, to have Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, and then you add Kyle Pitts, and you have Hayden Hurst, and you have Mike Davis, actually, out of the backfield, who filled in pretty well in place of Christian McCaffrey last year with the Carolina Panthers. Definitely an upgrade over with what you had with Todd Gurley in 2020. And then you say, all right, let's trade away the most important, most proven asset over on the offensive side for, as we mentioned, this is quarterback relevant, a guy like Matt Ryan who's not getting any younger. So why not worry about getting as many weapons around him while you still can in the years that he's still viable? And for Terry Fontenot, you really want to be the rookie GM that comes in and trades away Julio Jones? Like, I don't know, man. I can't see a scenario in which this feels like the right choice. And I understand there's salary cap involved in all of this and everything, but you have other ways on that team to maintain and create salary cap. There's restructure options for both Julio Jones as well as Grady Jarrett, who you just mentioned. I mean, there are ways to go ahead and continue to create salary cap around them. And what do you plan to do with that money at this stage of free agency anyway? I just really can't see a space where this makes a ton of sense for the at least not for the 2021 Atlanta Falcons, maybe for the 2022-2023 Atlanta Falcons. But right now, with this year being what it is, and knowing that Kyle Pitts is going to need some adjustment time to the NFL, which is traditionally necessary for tight ends who are coming into the league, I just don't see this being the right choice for them right now.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there. And, some of the teams rumored to have interest. The New England Patriots have had discussions, according to various media reports, about maybe adding him into the mix there. And, we talk about the New England Patriots. They've needed some wide receiver help for quite some time. They've needed some guys. Julian Edelman's retired. He was a big, stable part of their production on offense. And so you look at the New England Patriots, you look at Cam Newton there, and then you're going to add in Mac Jones eventually. Maybe this year he might get playing time, or maybe next year. You have to have some options there. So they're going to be one of those teams that explores it. Some other teams that have been mentioned out there too, the Chargers, which doesn't make too much sense to me considering Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, just the young guys that they have there as well. It doesn't make too much sense with the price tag that I think Mike Williams will command, not to mention Keenan Allen too. So that is a destination that doesn't make too much sense for me. But I think at this point, everything's all speculation. Maybe Green Bay's in the mix, but then again, the cap space for them is very tricky. But if they offset Aaron Rodgers, maybe they could get Julio. But then again, it's all at that point, it's completely pointless to be able to do that. So
yeah.
Wild.
I mean, we'll see exactly how it all comes down. But could you imagine, though? I mean, let's just think a little bit more about, before we get to our guest here, about the most ideal landing place for Julio Jones if he were shipped out. We talked about New England. We talked about Los Angeles Chargers probably not being the place that makes the most sense. San Francisco seems to be an option. They're up there in the odds as well. But I feel like New England would be the spot for me that I look at and go, that might be the most advantageous spot for Julio Jones. But is there a certain spot that you look at that you say, no, that's the spot for him?
Oh, yeah. I mean, when you mentioned San Francisco, that's a destination. But then again, the Arizona Cardinals, even DeAndre Hopkins says, hey, I would be willing to take a pay cut and restructure to be able to get Julio there. For me, I think San Francisco would be a fun option there. Now, I just don't see the Atlanta Falcons trading away Julio to a team that beat them in the Super Bowl.
Right.
Part of me has a hard time
there, right there.
But then again, there's been so much change with that Falcons organization since that Super Bowl appearance that, then again, it may not surprise me if it does happen. But to be honest with you, Ross, I'm going to get my projection. I don't think that Julio's traded this year. Maybe after this year. I just don't see it being this year.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I tend to be very stale when it comes to off-season trade talk pre-post draft anyway, as it is. But I'll tell you what, we did get some great quarterback moves early on in the off-season, one of which, of course, including Carson Wentz heading from Philly to the Indianapolis Colts. And to help us sort of talk a bit about the projection for Carson Wentz moving forward, we're going to bring in our good friend, Evan Sidery, host of the Locked On Colts podcast. You can follow over on Locked On Colts. Evan, how you doing, brother?
Doing good, Ross. How you doing? Hey, Cody. How you doing?
Good. Welcome in. Obviously, happy Sunday. But, we're talking about quarterbacks here today. And the team that you cover for the Locked On Colts podcast, they had a change of quarterback this offseason. Phillip Rivers, we know him. I think we all have a lot of respect for him. He retired. He's going on to coach high school football. And now enter Carson Wentz. And this is kind of the storyline we've been looking at. And I want to ask you, kind of what is your thought so far since the offseason has played out as to how Carson Wentz will fit in with this Indianapolis Colts team this upcoming season?
I think it's going to be a very interesting fit, not only for the player, but also just the scheme fit themselves, because I think Frank Reich's kind of been hamstrung the last couple of years since Andrew Luck's been retiring. Outside of being able to have a quarterback that moves outside the pocket, some more motions outside the pocket to get some more extended plays. And Carson Wentz is going to be able to do that. We've heard rave reviews so far out of Colts camp, at the mini camp so far, talking through really Wentz. It seems like a seamless transition for him with Frank Reich back in 2017, was his former offensive coordinator, as we all know, is an MVP candidate. Went really would have been MVP before he tore his ACL late in the season. And it seemed like they're really getting back in sync almost immediately. When you have a coach and a quarterback in sync this much, it really could be good results for the Colts. And I think with Wentz's ability, with his big arm and his ability to extend plays, we're probably going to get a little bit closer to what we saw in 2018 with Andrew Luck behind center. I don't know if it's going to be the same caliber quarterback. This will be a very similar playbook.
One of the biggest issues around Carson Wentz in Philly, if you talk to a Philadelphia Eagles fan at least, were the weapons that were around him. Can you give us a little bit of an evaluation for the weapons that the Colts are going to be able to put around him here in 2021, and whether or not there's still some work to be done there, or how are you feeling about it?
I'm feeling pretty good about the Colts' weapons. I would say T.Y. Hilton's taken a step or two back over the last couple of years, not the same guy, but Michael Pittman Jr. and Paris Campbell, two guys the Colts are really banking on, young prospects. to take leaps here in 2021. Pittman really came on the playoff game last year, had 100 yards receiving. He seems to be their WR1 moving forward. Carson Wentz loves those big bodies as well. He could be the guy who gets around 100 targets this year. And Paris Campbell with 6 foot, 4.31 speed in the slot, he's going to be a mismatch nightmare for Carson Wentz to utilize as a safety blanket. And you can't forget about Jonathan Taylor in the backfield. He was one of the best running backs in the NFL over the last second half of the season. I think with having Taylor back there, also Nyheim Hines and Marlon Mack, who they re-signed as a change of pace back, it's going to take a lot of pressure off Wentz's shoulders where he's not got to be a hero. He can really just be a top 10, top 12 quarterback, and the Colts could be really steering the ship right toward a wild card or playoff berth.
Well, and I'm glad that you mentioned that because when we watched Wentz last year with Philadelphia, it looked like he was just trying to do everything because, supporting cast around him wasn't there from the running back position. The offensive line was a turnstile for him. I mean, it was like, who's going to be starting? Who's going to be out this week or that week? I mean, we saw Wentz take shot after shot, and so he tried to do too much. Now, I look at the Indianapolis Colts roster. You mentioned the weapons that they have, the running backs that they have to take that pressure off. Even on the defensive side of the ball, I feel like they've gotten better as well. But for you, do you feel like maybe a change of scenery for Carson Wentz might bode well for his confidence? Because I feel like coming into the season, I was skeptical as to whether or not his confidence could be repaired. I mean, obviously you've been able to cover the Colts up close and personal. What are the early reports coming out of, mini camp and things along the nature, OTAs, phase 2 of the offseason program about how he's commanding things?
Yeah, I think it's just a clean slate all around for Carson Wentz, where it seemed like the Philadelphia media, just that pressure in Philadelphia. We all know if you go into Philadelphia, you don't perform well, they can turn on you just in a quick second there. And Carson Wentz saw that in 2020 where everything went wrong for him. The fans turned on him. Everything kind of just went south for him. And I think mentally he kind of broke down a little bit. And he admitted to that at his press conference last month, I believe, talking through just the transition to Indy. And he's a Midwest guy. He's from North Dakota. His wife's from Kentucky. It seems like a place where he can really just reset and just kind of take a back seat where the Indy media is not going to be just all over him 24/7. It's kind of more of a laid-back environment, the Midwest environment too, to get kind of back into the old familiar territory that we saw in college. I think from that standpoint, he just seems like he's just gleaming ear to ear. Like he seems like a different Carson Wentz from what we saw in 2020, where he just seems so excited to get into a new, fresh start and in a place where with Frank Reich at the helm, he feels that is most comfortable. He's mentioned him and Frank Reich almost like best friends, where when you have that kind of connection with your coach, it really does help out.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got for Carson Wentz here a connection with the coaching staff, weapons around him, a solid offensive line. What about over on the defensive side, which of course may not be on the field at the same time as the quarterback, but always ends up helping out the quarterback as they move forward? How are you feeling about the defense? Because there was a big focus, particularly on the defensive line for the Colts during this draft.
Yeah, if you guys were able to see my live reaction to the Kwity Paye pick, it's an absolute home run. It's one of the best picks, I think, in the first round, just schematically. Anything more toward just Kwity Paye's short-term and long-term development, play next to DeForest Buckner. I mean, that's going to be an easy transition for him where he's not going to see double teams. He's not going to see much pressure. It's going to be a lot of teams focusing early and often on DeForest Buckner next to him in the middle. And you see Kwity Paye on the outside. He's going to be able to have an easy transition where he could get 6 to 8 sacks right off the bat in his rookie year and really be set up for a really great year alongside Buckner long term. But he also looked in the back end there with Darius Leonard, Bobby Okereke, linebacker, Kenny Moore, one of the most underrated slot corners in the NFL. And he also have Xavier Rhodes, who really seems like a perfect fit in this zone-heavy scheme from when he saw and win Minnesota. And then Julian Blackmon, one of the more underrated young safeties in the NFL as well.
One of my favorites, honestly.
No, he's a hard hitter. Like he's so fun to watch, quite honestly. But when you see all these young guys coalescing together, you adding Kwity Paye to the mix. Dio Odengbo, their second-round pick out of Vanderbilt, is someone Chris Bauer's in love with. He has the longest wingspan in the NFL. So it's really going to be interesting to see how all these pieces gel together. But I think, honestly, they were missing just one element, and that was pass rush last year, and a little inconsistency in the back end, which I think is going to be helped out with the addition of Kwity Paye. So if they were a top 10 defense last year, if Kwity Paye hits the ground running, this could be a top 5 defense in the NFL, in my opinion.
Well, and one thing I wanted to ask you too, kind of staying on the theme of projections, I mean, taking a look at that division too in the AFC South, you have the Jacksonville Jaguars with Trevor Lawrence. They're still a young team going through a rebuild. The Tennessee Titans, in my opinion, are still a question mark at this point, because we saw in the NFL playoffs, if you could really take away Derrick Henry, you have a strong chance to win. And that's exactly what Baltimore did against him. Now, my thought, because we didn't get a chance to have you on the schedule release show here, how do you feel like the Colts stack up this upcoming season in that AFC South division against these teams?
Yeah, I think quite honestly, they're really set up well. I think Tennessee losing Arthur Smith is a really underrated loss this offseason. Not having that creativity for Ryan Tannehill and those weapons. I think they might take a little bit of a step back. Derrick Henry, you don't know when the wheels are kind of starting to fall off a little bit. He's at over 500 carries the last couple of years. You have to see how he does there. But you have to wonder with that defense, just with Tennessee, they're very inconsistent. You have Carson Wentz coming in here, a mobile quarterback that Frank Reich has not had since Andrew Luck. I think it could be a lot of fun for this Colts offense this year with those weapons that I mentioned before, where I think you could see something along the lines of a sweep. I think they're going to sweep the Tennessee Titans this year. They play, I think, twice in the first 8 weeks. And in Jacksonville's always tough in Jacksonville. I don't know why the Colts always seem to lose down there, but you have to think, quite honestly, that this could be a situation where the Colts could be undefeated in the division this year. I predicted that they could be 6-0 in the division this year. And I honestly think that could happen. I mean, unless Tennessee doesn't have a drop-off due to Carson Wentz, due to Ryan Tannehill and Arthur Smith going to Atlanta, I really think this could be a situation where the Colts could be undefeated in the division this year.
I'm loving it.
Evan
absolutely killed it here with us today. Thank you so much for taking the time to come through. You can hear more from Evan every Monday through Friday over on the Locked On Colts podcast, wherever you get your podcast. We appreciate you coming through, buddy.
Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, I think he has a strong argument there. I honestly, Tennessee's going to be that question mark, but really nobody else is standing in the way, in my opinion, in that division of the Indianapolis Colts. I don't see Jacksonville doing it because, like I said, I mean, yes, you have the number 1 overall pick, but I think it's going to take Trevor Lawrence some time to really get acclimated to the climate of the NFL. We started to see in this last year at Clemson, there were moments where he started to look not as unhuman as he has in the past. And when you come to the NFL, it's just a different animal. And he's going to face some tough teams to start off. And I think that the Colts have a really good opportunity to expand on it. I think really it's going to be a 2-team race between Tennessee and Indy. And right now, I think on paper, if we look at the moves that have been made, I think Indy's obviously the favorite for the division. So I agree with Evan there.
Yeah, I got to agree there. Once again, if you're just now joining us, Locked On NFL Sunday, Cody Roark at Cody Roark NFL, myself, Ross Jackson at Ross Jacksonola here with you every Sunday to recap the biggest stories throughout the week. And yeah, Cody, look, I completely agree. The AFC South really right now feels like the Indianapolis Colts to run, even if Carson Wentz doesn't shake out. I mean, we talked when we right after we had that conversation with Aaron Freeman of Locked On Falcons about how it's not only just about the quarterback, right? Like you have to put a winning team around the quarterback. Obviously, the franchises that we cover have shown that either a need for that or success with that over the last decade or so, different times. You look at the offensive line that Indy has continued to build there. They're focused in the trenches, both on the offensive and defensive sides. The weapons that he talked about, that Evan talked about from Locked On Colts over on the outside for Carson Wentz, and having a running back like Jonathan Taylor, who I'm trying to steal away in all of my dynasty fantasy leagues right now because I really, really like the guy. You've built, the Colts have built a team around Carson Wentz that can win, even if he does need that adjustment period. And it's something that I think we're learning is more and more and more important as we continue to look at these teams across the NFL who may have the franchise quarterback, question mark answered, but don't have enough around them just yet.
No, I agree. And we got a comment in here from Corey Johnson. He says, why y'all be hating on Wentz after one bad year? We're not hating on Carson Wentz. I want to be very clear about that. Here's the deal.
Right.
With Carson Wentz last year, he was in a situation and an environment where the supporting cast around him was not good enough, that he had to do too much, and that really hurt him. It put him at risk for injury, and also it hurt his confidence. I think that in Indianapolis, I think he's got an opportunity to kind of revamp things and maybe find that. And so far, early reports out of camp suggest that Wentz is on the right track. But then again, we got to see in the regular season. But Wentz was not in a very good situation in Philadelphia. I mean, I think that was probably one of the most detrimental environments for any quarterback to be in outside of just the media and just how angry the fan base gets. But he was just taking shots left and right, and that's not good. So Wentz has a chance to do that. We don't hate Wentz. We like Wentz. Wentz is a phenomenal human being. He's a good football player, but last year was a really rough year for him. And so now he's got to overcome that.
Absolutely. And I just want to see him start to overcome it. That's my big thing. Like, as I look at it right now, and as we look at it and go through, heading into the 2021 season, it's still a wait and see type of a thing when it comes to Carson Wentz. Is he going to be able to adjust? He's in the right situation. And this is what I said the moment that he ended up in Indianapolis. We both said this over here on this very show, that if there was going to be a place to where Carson Wentz was going to be able to rebound and rebuild his career, it was with the Indianapolis Colts. This was the right move in the right place for him to end up. This is his best chance. And now it's just about waiting and seeing. There's no other quarterback breathing down his neck.
No,
you have pieces all around him. You don't have, you have a stable of running backs that can produce, but there's a focus in terms of who the lead back is. I mean, you have all the questions answered right now. Now the only thing is you have all the questions answered around Carson Wentz. Now the only question left is Carson Wentz, and is he going to be able to do it? That's my big thing. And so if he does, and if he ends up, like, I'm going to go back to Corey here real quick. He had mentioned that we right back in the top 5 discussion. If he does end up there, that's comeback player of the year for me. I mean, like, that's simply, you know what I mean? Like, that is comeback player of the year because he would absolutely deserve it. So that's all that it is. That's all it is. No hate towards Carson Wentz at all. Just want to see it come together for him.
That's all I got to say, man. We're here.
That's what we're talking about. Look at us.
But I want to throw a reminder out there to everybody that's watching this right now. We stream this live on every feed possible, Twitter, Periscope, and also, we have YouTube. Just want to remind you, please check out the Locked On NFL YouTube channel. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications. We're going to post videos. You're going to get a lot of daily content, and not to mention a live Sunday NFL show hosted by Ross, myself, featuring the local experts covering the biggest stories from around the National Football League. We're going to take a look at fantasy. We're going to take a look at all of that this upcoming season. You can get that here for your pregame show rather than all the craziness that you see on some of the major networks. We got you covered here. So Locked On NFL on YouTube. Be sure to hit that subscribe button.
Absolutely. Make sure as well for all of the sports news around, check out Locked On Network on Twitter. You'll know that you're at the right place because it's verified. It's got the check mark.
It's got the blue check. Ross, I'm trying to get like you one of these days, my man. But yes, no, I agree. A lot of great coverage, too. We got the MLB going on right now. You got the NHL playoffs. You got the NBA playoffs. We have a variety of great local experts in those respective fields. And also, you can check out Locked On Today, hosted by Peter Bukowski. Yeah. And it's 20 minutes of all the major sports talk every single day. What's going on? You're up to date on your way to work, whether you're in the shower listening to it, whether you're working out. Peter Bukowski has you covered Locked On Today and your favorite podcast provider.
Love it. Cody, as we get ready for our next guest to come through here in a little while, we're going to continue to talk about some of the big quarterback stories around the NFL. Let's go to your Broncos here and talk a little bit about the quarterback situation in Denver. Now, obviously, there's another option out there that maybe Denver fans are crossing their fingers for, but let's focus first on the guys that are in the facility. The Broncos making a move early on in this offseason to bring in Teddy Bridgewater in addition to Drew Lock, who's already there. What's sort of your kind of temperature on, or what's the temperature you've taken, let me say it that way, on the franchise and where it stands at quarterback right now?
Well, look, I've had this discussion with so many Broncos fans on the Lockdown Broncos podcast that I'm not going to talk about the unicorn quarterbacks out there, the hypotheticals, until that happens. But, we do have to focus on the guys on the roster. And so right now, the Broncos, they have Drew Lock entering his third year in the National Football League. They have Teddy Two Gloves, who is a veteran signing literally the day before the NFL draft. And to be honest with you, Teddy Bridgewater, he has yet to be at the at phase 2 of the workouts. He's been dealing with some personal stuff, but he's expected to be there for mandatory minicamp. But Vic Fangio has said this is going to be a 50-50 competition for the quarterback spot this upcoming year. I think Drew Lock will obviously get the first reps to start, but they're going to get the same sample size. And it's up to Drew Lock to really say, hey, look, I've got to take this competition in stride. He's been at phase 2. He's been at these voluntary workouts. He's been throwing in those drills. So he's taking advantage of it. He's getting ahead of it. He's made some mechanic changes to his footwork and his stance in the shotgun rather than being so heavy loaded where his right foot is back, because then it requires him to take more steps in his drop back, and it takes away from time to being able to process the field. So he's been working with Peyton Manning, which is great, but it's really going to be up to Drew Lock to take really a firm grasp on this and allow maybe even Teddy Bridgewater to mentor him. That's really what it's going to be. That's the hope that the Broncos have, is that Drew Lock can win this competition and Teddy could be a great veteran mentor for him along the way, because if anything ever happens to Drew, they'd be confident in Teddy Bridgewater coming in. Now, if Teddy wins the job in competition, Ross, it's going to tell the Broncos, okay, Drew Lock is not the guy, and we're going to have to focus after this year on a long-term solution at the position. Right. And so that's kind of where Denver's at. But, at the same time, too, we talked about these situations at quarterback. Denver feels very strongly, regardless if it's Teddy, whether it's Drew, that they will have a good team around them this year because they're focused on running the football. They've got Melvin Gordon. They've got Javonte Williams, who was arguably one of the best backs in the NFL draft this past year. So we'll see how that plays out. They're getting Cortland Sutton back on the outside, and they have Tim Patrick. So you have 6'4", 6'5" size on the outside, Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler speed, and not to mention Tyree Cleveland coming into the mix a little bit, and Noah Fant. I can't even forget Noah Fant. And a more solidified offensive line right now. Right tackle is a little bit of a question, but Denver's got a better offensive product on paper and a very strong defense. So it might take that pressure off the quarterback position this year, but if Drew Lock takes that next step and explodes, Denver's going to be sitting in a really good spot.
I got to tell you how refreshing it is to hear someone else talking about whether or not it's going to be Drew or Teddy next year. That feels pretty good. No, but I think that Denver has found themselves, even just with the options in the facility, right? Not acknowledging or talking about the unicorns. We will talk about the unicorns and the hypotheticals. We'll get to that. But as we focus on the guys that are in the facility, they're in a really good place here in terms of trying to figure out what's next for them at the quarterback position. We talked about this with the New York Giants before, right? There's enough around the quarterback position for Denver to be able to make an accurate evaluation about what their next step is. If Drew Lock takes a step forward, he'll have the weapons to be able to win with this team. If he doesn't, and Teddy Bridgewater ends up having to come in, or Drew Lock gets hurt, right? Something completely outside of anybody's control, then all of a sudden you understand that you have still a very, very good environment upon which to bring and introduce a new quarterback, whether it be through the draft, whether it be through free agency in the offseason. You've put together, the Denver Broncos have a vehicle for which or in which you can plug in a quarterback and find success.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think culture is really important too. We talk about environment, we talk about culture. Organizations need stability in these areas, I think, for any player to succeed, but more importantly, the quarterback position, as we've talked about. Right now, I think the Broncos have a really strong culture. Now, there's fans on the outside that, yes, you look at the losing seasons and you may not equate that, but what George Payton and Vic Fangio have built in that locker room, I mean, that locker room is very tight-knit with Vic Fangio. They love him. Right. They really respect him as a coach, and that coaching staff is pretty well-rounded across the board. We talk about Mike Munchak. We talk about John Pagano, the outside linebacker coach. Christian Parker is a DB coach. I mean, Denver's got all these different experienced players and obviously guys that have been around the game for a long time.
Right.
So that bodes well. And so George Payton has really come in. He's really embraced culture, and that's been a really big thing. And their draft process leading up, they were all about selecting guys that have character and leadership on and off the field. Those are the top qualities. And if a guy didn't have leadership traits on the field or even off the field and you were concerned, they weren't even on the Broncos board. So that tells you how much they view Patrick Surtain as their first-round selection, which, look, I'm excited to see him play. But Denver's got the team this year that can compete. We'll see if the quarterback play can elevate it a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about the hypotheticals, right? And explore the possibilities for the Denver Broncos. Aaron Rodgers being on the market, oftentimes if he's on the market, let me say it that way, oftentimes when people are talking about destinations, Denver Broncos come up. Does this feel like something that could happen for the Denver Broncos if Aaron Rodgers is actually on the market? Can they afford him? Does he fit? Is Denver a good landing spot for him?
Yeah, Denver's got, I believe they're in the top 5 in terms of available cap space. And, obviously we're looking at that post-June 1st designation. If in fact the deal were to happen, it wouldn't cost the Green Bay Packers $33 million, which if they did it right now, $33 million dead cap would account for Rodgers being off. They don't want to pay that. So after June 1st, it drops down to $17 million, which you're okay with eating that up a little bit. So there is a possibility that Denver, like if Rodgers is available, the Broncos will make an offer. They will make a push and they'll try to see what they can do to acquire him. And you just really can't help but think, like, how lucky are the Broncos if this were to happen? I mean, you get Peyton Manning. You had John Elway. I mean, Jake Plummer is a pretty good signing for them. He took them to the AFC Championship game in 2005. You go through quarterback purgatory from 2006 all the way to 2012, and then you get Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning leads you to some great 4 years of football, and then you've been in purgatory ever since, right? And then all of a sudden, a future first ballot Hall of Famer is going to fall into your laps once again. I mean, I just can't think of anything more crazy for Denver. But then again, it's like, what do the Broncos do at this point? If, in fact, they do acquire Aaron Rodgers, what happens when Aaron Rodgers retires? What are you doing to prepare for that inevitability at some point, 3 to 4 years, maybe 5 years from now? I mean, that's kind of where I'm at with the whole situation, but it really just depends on where Rodgers' head is at. And, he's been very outspoken this offseason about kind of how he feels. And the there was a report that John Elway and Aaron Rodgers were playing golf together. That's not the case. They didn't play golf together. They bumped into each other. And obviously
very different.
So we'll see how things go. But yeah, Rodgers would immediately elevate this team. I mean, to be honest with you, Denver would have to give up a lot of future draft capital, which I think, you make that it's a investment you're willing to make. You want to see if the ROI is going to come back on that. But then outside of that, you might have to give up a couple of talented pieces. But Denver's talent all across the board, Rodgers would elevate them immediately, I think, to be favorites to compete with Kansas City in the AFC West.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if you get more years out of Rodgers than you give up draft picks, then you've probably won that trade, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the way that I look at it. You get more successful years out of Aaron Rodgers than the 3 years of draft picks. Let's just say that you end up getting shipped out. That's a win for Denver. And it's tough. It's always tough to go from one Hall of Fame quarterback and then try to fall your way into another. It very rarely happens in the Saints. I mean, I can speak from experience there. That's really what they're in the midst of right now as well.
Well, yeah, and I actually want to flip the script here, Ross. I mean, I was just going to say the Broncos, they went through what it was like after Peyton Manning retired, but now the Saints, they enter this upcoming season post Drew Brees. Brees obviously getting into the broadcasting game, which I think he'll do phenomenal at, but a lot of questions. We talked about the cap space that the Saints are dealing with entering the offseason, but they're ironing things out there. They've added some defensive beef, some really good players there. Obviously, Alvin Kamara. I don't know if you saw my comment on your Locked On Saints YouTube channel, but Kamara, who's the quarterback? He's going to eat. So I think he's going to have a big season. Michael Thomas, can he stay healthy? Can he stay kind of consistent without getting outside of his head a little bit, right?
Yeah.
If Chauncey Gardner-Johnson's getting in your head at practice, teams are going to take that and they're going to use it against you. So we'll see. But, who's it going to be? Is it going to be Jameis Winston? Is it going to be Taysom Hill? Is it going to be, one of these other quarterbacks they picked up in the NFL draft? I mean, what is the state of the Saints at quarterback right now, and how are you feeling about it?
Yeah, it's really interesting to watch for right now, but I can tell you this, both Jameis Winston and Taysom Hill have really leaned into this competition, and this competition has begun well before training camp. I was talking to Luke Johnson, who writes for the New Orleans Advocate, Times-Picayune down there, and we both agreed that this competition obviously started last year, right, when they were both in the facility. But as you watch them away from the field, what are they doing? What are they saying? How are they portraying themselves? How are they talking about one another? They both are showing the utmost respect for one another in the midst of this competition. One of them, though, taking a different approach than the other. I mean, you look at Jameis Winston's Instagram, he's constantly posting his training. He's working out with Jay Glazer. He's out there. He's working with Adam Troutman, tight end for the New Orleans Saints, a few wide receivers, Ty Montgomery, their wide receiver / running back hybrid. I mean, he's out in California putting in work, and you can see all of it. Meanwhile, Taysom Hill is in Idaho training right now on his, let's say on his own as far as we know, but we don't know that for sure, right? He could have just as many Saints receivers that are along with him. We just don't know because he's not being as open with his training as what you're seeing from Jameis Winston.
Yeah. So and that's a good thing too.
Right. And I don't think either one approach is better than the other or worse than the other. I think that they're both just different approaches, and they're both putting in a ton of work, and it's been very interesting to watch. I don't expect that we're going to know who the starting quarterback is for the New Orleans Saints until we're about halfway through the practice week in week 1. And that's not because the decision might not be obvious. We get 3 preseason games this year. You're going to get a good look at these quarterbacks before the season begins. But Sean Payton notoriously mum each time that there has been any question about who the next quarterback is going to be. Even in the 2 years now when the Saints lost Drew Brees to a UCL injury in 2019, Sean Payton teased a 2-quarterback system before he was even willing to say Teddy Bridgewater is the starter for New Orleans. And even though they had a pre-contract agreement, like before Taysom Hill's contract was even signed, there was an agreement that if Drew Brees missed time during the regular season, that Taysom Hill would be the starting quarterback. Again, they still waited until the last moment that they needed to in order to announce who that quarterback was going to be going into that Atlanta Falcons game in 2020. So while the decision may be made, and while the decision may be made during the preseason, I don't think we're going to hear about it yet until the beginning of the 2021 regular season.
Well, my question is are we going to see where, let's say Jameis Winston's leading a drive and he leads it past the 50-yard line, we're going to see Taysom Hill being put in at that point. I mean, that's the thing, because that was an often criticism last year from New Orleans Saints fans. And I even think media members that sometimes when Drew Brees was leading a drive, they'd put Taysom in and it would kill the momentum because of, plays going backwards and teams maybe diagnosing what they were going to do. Do you feel like that's still going to be an angle this upcoming season, regardless if Taysom starts or Jameis?
Yeah, I very much believe that if Jameis Winston wins the starting position, that you'll still see Taysom Hill take snaps under center or from the shotgun in the red zone. He's such a valuable red zone option, both as a receiver, a runner, and even now as a potential passer, which I think actually works in Sean Payton's favor. That I still think that in the red zone, you're going to see Taysom Hill get snaps, even if Jameis Winston wins that. And I think you'll see less criticism, because the criticism before was, why take a Hall of Famer off of the field? Now it's going to be, why take Jameis Winston off the field? I have a feeling fewer people are going to be asking that question at that time, especially understanding Taysom Hill's viability in the red zone. I would not be surprised to see that at all.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, there's a difference when you're Drew Brees versus Jameis Winston, right?
For sure.
We'll see if post-LASIK Jameis Winston will be the guy for this organization. But yeah, obviously a lot of questions too. But let's talk about the supporting cast around whoever may be the quarterback, right? There's Jameis Winston, there's Taysom Hill. But what about wide receivers? We know Michael Thomas is there. Who can the next quarterback of the team rely on outside of Michael Thomas?
Well, you'll have Michael Thomas and you have Alvin Kamara, right? Because Kamara will continue to be a part of the passing game as well as a part of the running game, and he'll swap and spend time with Latavius Murray, who actually saw 42 targets last year in 2020. So he's shown that he can be a viable option out of the backfield as well. And he's a fantastic pass protector. So you can look at both of those being pluses for whomever that quarterback ends up being. But at the wide receiver position, specifically outside of Michael Thomas, there's a big question mark about who wide receiver 2 is going to be. Traequan Smith, who was drafted out of UCF in 2018, he was somebody that was coming in as averaging 19.8 yards per catch upon graduating. But he ended up moving to the slot because they had Ted Ginn Jr. playing the Z flanker receiver role. Then the following season, when they finally moved on from Ted Ginn Jr., they brought in Emmanuel Sanders, who ended up playing that role in 2020. So now does Traequan Smith finally get the opportunity to go out there and play the position he was drafted to play, as opposed to where he was moved in the slot, and allow him to compete at that Z flanker role? I give him the leg up right now at that position, but keep an eye on undrafted free agent second-year guy now out of Tennessee, Marquez Callaway, who has shown a real viability at the wide receiver position, although he could be effective in the slot as well.
There's going to be some intriguing options, because I was wondering about the Emmanuel Sanders departure. I feel like that was going to be big because we saw him make some big plays last year in moments where they absolutely needed it. So I think it gives, an opportunity for Smith to maybe step up into that role. So I like it, Ross. The Saints are a team that's going to intrigue me. I'm going to be watching them closely this season because I do want to see how they execute things, especially after the post-Drew Brees era. I still think defensively they have a very strong team, which could help take a little bit of pressure off whoever's the quarterback, because you still have Kamara, as you mentioned, Latavius Murray, who last year in action, he stepped up in a big way. He hurt the Broncos in that game against the Broncos defense. He had some big runs. So they have a nice, reliable 1-2 punch, I think, in New Orleans, a strong defense. That will definitely help take the pressure off of them.
Absolutely. And to keep up with more on the Broncos and the Saints, make sure you check out the Locked On Broncos podcast every Monday through Friday, which is also now on YouTube. Locked On Broncos. You can find it by searching Locked On Broncos on YouTube. You can do the same with Locked On Saints on YouTube, as well as at your favorite podcast provider. Of course, Locked On Broncos hosted here by Cody Roark at Cody Roark NFL. Locked On Saints, myself, Ross Jackson at Ross Jackson Nola. Now we're going to move on to our next guest for today's episode, who got some big news at the quarterback position here this week, and certainly some news that I was very happy about, being a Louisiana boy myself. We're going to bring in James Rapine of the Locked On Bengals podcast. You can follow him on Twitter at James Rapine. James, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Good, man. Good to see you.
Good to see you, James. I want to start things off too with this question, because I know the debate, and I know that you and Jake have had this discussion on the podcast multiple times. We saw in the NFL draft that they decided to reunite Joe Burrow with one of his best targets at the collegiate level in LSU, and Jamar Chase. And the offensive line has still been a question. But first off, we talk about ACL recovery. We saw the new jerseys. We saw that nice scar that Joe Burrow had. How are things progressing for him at this point of the offseason coming off of ACL?
I think about as well as could be expected. I know he threw to Jamar Chase earlier this week. Speaking of that connection, that's the first time that the two have linked up since 2019 and LSU versus Clemson, right? So I think he was probably pretty excited to do that. And yeah, the Dr. Neil Elatrash obviously reporting or texting, to Adam Schefter earlier this week. And I know Burrow was in Los Angeles last weekend to undergo tests and test out that knee. And everything seems to be pointing in the right direction, where not only is he going to be back week 1, but clearly he's allowed to throw to receivers on a regular basis. I know Burrow's worked out, and like I said, with Jamar Chase, but he's also reached out to some of these other guys, the veterans that aren't necessarily expected to be there over the next few weeks during OTAs. And I think he's trying to make sure that they're there, because he didn't get to throw to these guys in person last year because of COVID, and he's not letting the ACL recovery get in the way. So I don't know how much we'll see media-wise from Burrow during OTAs, but I do think he's going to be working with these guys behind the scenes.
Look, I'm very excited to see Joe Burrow here in 2021. It was such a pleasure to get to watch him while he was available in 2020. Of course, unfortunately, going down with that injury. And I know a lot of folks look at the Jamar Chase selection in the draft, and I imagine that the fan base is kind of split there, just like most of national media is split in terms of going Jamar Chase, going with the wide receiver as opposed to the offensive lineman. What do you have to say to folks that are concerned that the Bengals didn't go after an offensive lineman in the first round?
Well, it's easy to be concerned because the offensive line's been an issue for the past 5 years. So I get it. And I'm not going to tell people that they're wrong.
Right.
At the same time, the Bengals clearly had Jamar Chase ahead of Penei Sewell. I mean, I look back to that December Monday, it was Monday night in December. The Bengals and Ryan Finley beat Pittsburgh at Paul Brown Stadium. And there's a big Penei Sewell sign in the stands. So fans have had their eyes on Sewell. And so for the Bengals to go the opposite way, right, is pretty telling. And I think fans really, since December to you fast forward to the draft last month, and it changed. It started to become a 50-50, as you mentioned. And now I think even more see the vision with Jamar Chase. So yes, protecting Burrow, absolutely an issue. They went after Jackson Carman. They think he can give them a lot of what Penei Sewell was going to give them in year 1. And they just thought Jamar Chase was the better prospect. And time will tell if they're right. Is it a risk? Absolutely. But if Penei Sewell is the next insert whatever offensive lineman the Bengals have drafted in the first round over the past 6 years that they've gotten wrong, and I'm not saying he is that, but if so, or if he's just an average lineman and Jamar Chase is the next Julio Jones, then no one's going to be complaining about it a few years from now. So the Bengals are banking on Chase, and I think that's where it comes from. They just had him higher on their board.
Well, we just talked about, Joe Burrow reuniting with, one of his teammates, Jamar Chase. Well, Thaddeus Moss is now a Cincinnati Bengal. Now, there was I didn't quite know what happened with the Washington football team last year. I know that for him, I think he was dealing with an injury. Is there any chance he's in line to maybe make the 53 this year, or has that already been established, or is he going to have to earn that in training camp?
I think he's definitely going to have to earn it. And I think that there are some young tight ends that they've brought in, Pro Wells from TCU, an undrafted free agent. They also added the kid from Arkansas, CJ O'Grady. And so he's in that pool of guys that if they contribute on special teams and show they can help out Darren Simmons in that special teams unit, and maybe catch a few passes here and there, they can make the team. But I don't think it's a sure thing by any stretch. And that rapport with Burrow helps. Obviously, being friends with Joe Burrow helps. But I think he's certainly going to have to earn it over the next few weeks and then obviously months as we look ahead to training camp.
Now, there's always been, and, I have the great pleasure of covering the Saints, so I see the Ohio to Louisiana connection all the time, but there's a big-time Louisiana to Ohio connection as well. Cam Sample out of Tulane heading over to Cincinnati in this draft as well. What can you tell us so far about this draft class for Cincinnati and some of the expectations that are there?
Man, I mean, they got bigger. They got bigger in the trenches. And that's the thing is, I think a lot of people see, they went for the flash with Jamar Chase and not Penei Sewell, not the tackle that's going to be there for the next decade. Well, maybe that's the case. We'll see. But 7 of their 10 draft picks were trench players, 4 defensive linemen, 3 offensive linemen. And when I was at rookie minicamp a couple of weeks ago, these guys are they're big. They're physical. They look physical from just their presence. It's not like they had pads on and stuff, but you mentioned the Louisiana connection. Tyler Shelvin out of LSU. Big. I mean, this guy made Cam Sample look small, and Cam Sample's big, right? So they certainly wanted to attack the lines of scrimmage and that was part of their goal in this draft, and that's what they did. So that's my biggest takeaway. Absolutely, did they get another playmaker in Jamar Chase for Joe Burrow? But you also add all these trench players to hopefully get better in what is, we all know, a really, really physical AFC North. And not only did they need to protect Burrow, but they needed to get better at getting after opposing quarterbacks and shutting down the run. So we'll see if they can do that, but that's certainly their vision and was their logic behind their 2021 draft class.
Love it. Well, the final thing I'm going to ask you here, James, we did get a chance to speak with you during our NFL schedule release show, but Ross and I were talking about it. And when we look at the additional playoff spot in the AFC and in the NFC in terms of the wild card, there was a conversation I had where I felt like there could be 3 teams from the AFC West, 3 teams from the AFC North potentially who could have 3 spots in the playoffs. And for you, I mean, looking at this division, you have the Baltimore Ravens, obviously a strong team there. Pittsburgh, kind of still up in the air in my opinion. And then the Cleveland Browns who got better. But then I think the Bengals absolutely got better this offseason. And they were relatively competitive last year, despite the fact that they were taking some shots and they were missing some key guys. Where do you see the Bengals this year in that AFC North division?
It's tough to pick them higher than 4th, given how tough the division is, right? But the path to them surprising people starts with Burrow getting the clearance that he got last week from Dr. Neil Elatrash and hopefully being 100%. So far, so good in that department. And then the schedule early on, there are some winnable games. I think Minnesota at home, that's a winnable game. Now, Mike Zimmer's a hell of a coach, and I think they're going to be better than they were last year, but that's better than opening up with Cleveland, right? Or opening up with a Baltimore, a team that's ran all over them in recent seasons. So I think the key is getting off to a good start. Can they start 4-2 or 3-3? Just get a little bit of momentum. So when they go to that mid part of their schedule where it's tough, where you're going on the road to Cleveland, you're going on the road to some of these tough places, Pittsburgh, right? That you can go there confidently. And so we'll see if they could do that. But getting off to a good start, because if they get off to a 2-4, 2-5 start, I think heads could roll. Maybe not head coach Zach Taylor, defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo. They've invested a lot of resources in free agency and in the draft in the defense. So if the defense struggles early, keep an eye there. And then on offense, what more could you ask for if you're Zach Taylor, this offensive-minded coach, in what is a prove-it year? You got Burrow. If he's healthy, you have Chase, you have Higgins, you have Boyd. The offensive line should be improved. And you have Joe Mixon in the backfield. So you got to go out, you got to put up points. And if they do that early, I think they can get some momentum. But it's tough because if they get off to a slow start, 6-25-1 over the past 2 years, that's tough to overcome if you start out 2-4, 2-5.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, y'all, James and Jake do a phenomenal job over at Locked On Bengals every Monday through Friday covering the Cincinnati Bengals. So if you want to keep up with them, make sure you search Locked On Bengals on your favorite podcast provider. James, we appreciate you taking the time to join us today, man.
Of course. Thanks for having me, guys. Take care.
Absolutely, buddy. Take care.
Ross, what are your thoughts? I firmly believe, and I felt like this last year, I felt like if Joe Burrow didn't get hurt, I felt like the Bengals had a chance to make the wild card last year. I wouldn't have been shocked if they did. I think that he had them more competitive probably than most people anticipated, but just a consistent shot, from defenses on him, that was concerning. But
of course,
man, he looked good. I mean, there were times where he made them look like a really damn good team, and he can elevate them.
Yeah, that's my thing, right? Like you have these quarterbacks that have the ability to elevate the talent around him. I think that Joe Burrow has proven that he can be that guy in the NFL with the time that we saw him there. Now, all of a sudden, you give him an offensive line that will be able to keep him upright. You add more weapons around him. You give him familiarity. Even on the defensive side, this guy's got familiarity. I mean, that 2019 LSU championship team is now in Cincy. Like, it's an incredible thing. And so I think you give him all of that now and then give him his innate ability, right? His natural ability to make the players around him better. I think they have a real shot to be able to contend as long as Joe Burrow is able to be, is able to stay healthy. I give the Bengals maybe a little bit more credit than a lot of folks do.
Well, I'm going to give you a hot take here, okay? This is a bold prediction. I think that the Pittsburgh Steelers will be at the bottom of the division this year. I think Cincinnati will be third, and I think that Cleveland will be first and Baltimore will be second, but it'll be a toss-up between everybody else.
I'm loving this bell. I'm loving this bell. That's how you know it's official, right?
It is.
No, I love it. I love it. And I'm all about and it's funny because how much of a hot take is that really? I mean, Pittsburgh.
Probably not really.
You know what I mean? Like Pittsburgh really is a big question mark in that division right now. The quarterback conversation, no quarterback behind Big Ben. Should anything go wrong, no viable quarterback at least. Spending a first-round selection, not on the offensive line, but on a running back, a very talented running back, but still not being able to help bolster your offensive line. We have the Cincinnati Bengals where we ask all these questions about the offensive line, but Pittsburgh shouldn't be really immune to those questions either.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that was my thought process. I felt like it was a massive mistake for Pittsburgh to bring back Big Ben this year. They should have looked into the future of what they were going to do at the quarterback position, maybe even enter a rebuild, because yes, you know what, you lose Bud Dupree, who I think that's going to be a really big loss for them defensively. But outside of that, TJ Watt, he's a stud. I mean, there's no question about it. But we started to see a little bit last year after Bud Dupree went down. It started to get a little bit harder for Watt to be able to get there at times because his pressure creates attention alone, and that freed up Bud Dupree in various situations. They couldn't even run the ball last year. I think Najee Harris is going to be a great addition for them. He's going to give them a dynamic as a receiver out of the backfield, but also as a runner in between the but they have to get out of the habit of having Big Ben throw the ball 50 times per game and ignore the run game. Try to get it going. But when you just abandon it in the first quarter because you're trying to throw it all over the place, it's not going to work. And that's what we saw with Pittsburgh last year. So I wouldn't be shocked if they're at the bottom of the division this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And, real quick, I just want to give a little bit of airtime here to my friend Michael Sachs, big time supporter of Locked On Saints. He's got a hot take of his own, which is that the Jacksonville Jaguars make the playoffs. Michael, you're a good friend, man, and I appreciate very much all your support. I can't co-sign with you on this, but I respect your position. I respect your position. I respect your courage. I'm going to give them another couple of years. I'm going to give them another couple of years and see what happens.
Tony Wiggins is on board with Michael.
That's right. Tony's all on board with it, though. All right. Let's get to our closing story here. Aaron Rodgers, right? We got to make sure that we cover it.
Yes.
We talked a little bit about it from the Denver perspective. Let's talk about it from the Aaron Rodgers NFL, NFC, Green Bay perspective. This move is something that really kind of came to a head during draft day, right? Which we should always be very cautious about draft day news. And I think that we've learned that over the course of the last few years. But here we are again with Aaron Rodgers, the seemingly annual offseason story now that he might be traded away from, or at least once out of the Green Bay Packers organization. Cody, let's start here. Does Aaron Rodgers play in Green Bay in the 2021 NFL season?
I think he does. Me personally, I think he does. And right now we're seeing just the conflict of different reports. We're seeing reports that he's unhappy, that he's still adamant he's out of Green Bay, he's not showing up. Then we see different reports that the relationship isn't as irreparable as most people are reporting or talking about. So which side do we believe, Ross? And when I look at Aaron Rodgers on Jeopardy, I think about the fans' response about who decided to kick the field goal rather than go for it. And he resonated with that very closely. I do think that Aaron Rodgers is unhappy, but is the relationship irreparable at this point? I mean, I don't know. I think anything is possible at this point in time. Financially, it wouldn't make too much sense for Green Bay to get rid of him. However, if you're going to draft Jordan Love in the first round, you might as well, if this is going to be the case, if Rodgers truly doesn't want to come back, why not accelerate that process and see what Jordan Love can do? Right? Because you have Davante Adams right now, right? And Davante Adams' contract will eventually be up. And if Rodgers is gone, Adams has said himself, I would have to seriously think about whether or not I would return because Aaron Rodgers is my guy. The receiving talent around them outside of that, it's kind of up in the air. Yes, they've added some defense, but that's been the issue. They've added defensively, and they haven't added any round one talent around Aaron Rodgers in a long time. So I think that's where the disconnect is for Rodgers. We've seen it be, vocalized a little bit. We noticed that he hasn't appeared on the Pat McAfee show since this whole thing has happened. Obviously, I think that's a good thing there. But he's been, we'll see. I still think he's going to be back in Green Bay this year. But after 2021, maybe not.
Yeah. And I think this feels a little bit like what we talked about with Russell Wilson at the beginning of the offseason, right? Like, yeah, okay, he might be unhappy with the organization, but him being moved right now during this 2021 offseason doesn't make sense, but next year certainly could make sense. I think you could say the exact same thing with Aaron Rodgers. Quick shout out to our Locked On Packers host and Locked On Today host, Peter Bukowski. Aaron Rodgers might not have been making any appearances on the Pat McAfee show, but Peter's tweets have been. So that's really, really great. Shout out to Peter for that. No, but yeah, I completely agree with you, Cody. I don't think that Green Bay moves Aaron Rodgers. And honestly, I don't think Aaron Rodgers pushes his way out of Green Bay, right? Because there's two ways to look at this.
Yeah.
this offseason. I think that the draft selection of Clemson's Amari Rodgers is actually a really underrated selection, first of all, in this draft. And I do think that helps to give Aaron Rodgers an additional weapon outside of Devontae Adams, a guy that he can just get the ball to at the line of scrimmage and let him put in the work on the backside with the ball in his hands. You've got Aaron Jones, who's returned. You've got this defense they've continued to build. I like very much what Green Bay has done this offseason. I know that they add Eric Stokes in the first round as opposed to going with the wide receiver. Terrace Marshall was on the board at that time, but there was a big question mark about Terrace Marshall's medicals during all of that. But regardless, I still think that they've done enough here to get Aaron Rodgers to say, all right, one more year, and then we'll reevaluate this after the season. I also think that fiscally, that's just what makes the most sense. We don't often see messy endings like this in the NFL. This is not often something that actually comes to fruition. We keep hearing it about several quarterbacks around the NFL. I think this is another one of those scenarios where the story got bigger than the situation.
Yeah. Well, and I think about this as well. Aaron Rodgers on Green Bay, they're the favorite to win the division. Aaron Rodgers not on Green Bay, they might be bottom of that division. Actually, you know what? Detroit's in that division. They're going to be the third. They're going to be the third place team in that division there. Right. Then again, that's just the nature of the business. I mean, it's crazy how you can look at Aaron Rodgers the year that he had last year and see that he instantly makes them a better team. I mean, he's the prime guy. And it's just a shame that they haven't surrounded him with a more solidified nucleus of talent around him. Devontae Adams is the best wide receiver in the NFL, in my firm opinion. But outside of that, you need somebody else that can take the pressure off him because he's going to see a lot of bracket coverage. He still beats it, but you want to have another option. That way you don't have to worry about it. And I think that really for Green Bay, we saw them in the NFC Championship game. They got a little too conservative, and Aaron Rodgers wasn't happy about it. So we'll see. Like you said, it doesn't make sense in 2021, but after 2021, they might be able throughout this year to put a plan in place for after the season that will help better prepare them for Jordan Love to take over rather than right now at this point in May.
Absolutely. Cody, always a pleasure to be here with you on these Sundays. Once again, thank you everybody for joining us for another episode of Locked On NFL Sunday. I'm Ross Jackson at Ross Jackson Nola, host of Locked On Saints, host of Locked On Broncos, here with me every weekend. Cody Roark at Cody Roark NFL. Always a pleasure to be here with you, brother.
Always, my friend. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in today. Locked On NFL Sunday Live. We bring it all football talk, no fluff. The biggest experts and the local experts on the biggest stories covering their teams and their storylines. We focused on quarterbacks today. We're going to take a look at some other positions next Sunday. And you can catch Ross Jackson and myself here once again. Until next time.